Hello, Ahmed.
Hi, Frank.
It's good. It's good to see you again.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to see you.
We were talking just now. I think it's been about 13 years since we last saw each other. Uh, Time flies, but yeah, I remember our last encounter very well at SOAS. For the launch of your book with Anthony Lowenstein. After Zionism. So anyway, good to see you again, mate.
You as well. And thank you for having me on today.
I wanted to talk to you today because I think it was yesterday I read this article in the Guardian about Palestinians and Palestinian-Americans suing the U.S. State Department for, in a way, its failure to abide by its own laws when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza. And I saw your name, and I was like, wow, Ahmed. So it was important for me to talk to you about it, and I was wondering, like, so what's the argument at the core of the lawsuit?
Yeah, so this is the second lawsuit that activists have organized targeting the United States participation in the genocide. And you hear the word complicity a lot, and I think that's a mischaracterization of the US's role. The US is an active participant in the genocide. Really, it's a matter of policy, in my view. And I think that view is supported by the evidence. But just backing up background. So we had, I believe it was the Center for Constitutional Rights, an attorney by the name of Diala Shammas, who went out and brought a suit, um, basically calling on the U.S. to observe its obligations under the Genocide Convention and to stop supporting Israel on that basis. And that lawsuit was thrown out basically by a judge who said that, well, this is a matter of foreign policy, and that is one of the president's prerogatives. The president makes decisions about matters of foreign policy in the United States. So the legal minds, the people who were behind this lawsuit, decided to take a different tack. Um, the the lawsuit that we've brought, that I'm a plaintiff in, and it was organized by Dawn, Democracy in the Arab World Now, Sarah Lee Whitson and Josh Paul and Charles Blaha. So two former, Sarah Lee Whitson is the executive director, former Human Rights Watch, I believe, and Josh and Charles are formerly of the State Department. They they brought this lawsuit basically saying that, well, there's a U.S. law called the Leahy Act, which prohibits the United States from sending weapons or material support to units, and this is a critical point, to units of foreign armed forces that may be committing human rights violations. And the question typically isn't, has there been a finding of a violation? It's, is there a reasonable expectation that the violations are occurring? And then there's a follow up. And Charles used to oversee that office. They would get 200,000 submissions annually to the office in the State Department. Basically, is this unit within this army in Sri Lanka violating human rights? Should we stop supporting them materially? And only 1 to 3% of the annual submissions were held up or regarded as being kind of credible grounds for sanctions. Sanctioning units, again, not militaries. Israel has never, and the law came into force in the 1990s, I think it was 1998. Israel has never seen a unit sanctioned. Typically, the line is, well, there may be some abuses, but we believe that the Israelis are capable of adjudicating them, or these aren't systemic abuses. But the reality is, the Israelis have never, or rather, the State Department has never provided a list of potential units within the Israeli army that are violating human rights or engaging in human rights violations. And it's unclear where the money that the United States sends to Israel goes. At this point in the genocide, there's a credible argument also that there's not one Israeli unit which is violating human rights law. Virtually all of them are, across the board. But in order to make that determination, we need some understanding of where the money's going and what those units are actually doing on the ground. And the State Department is refusing to provide that, has never provided that, and is engaged in this kind of roundabout effort to provide weapons to the Israeli army, which distributes those weapons to its commanders in the units without any oversight. So this lawsuit just says there's a U.S. law called the Leahy Law. We want the federal government to abide by the law. The same process that Turkey is held to, the same process that Norway is held to, the same process that India is held to, Israel should be held to.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmed. And I mean, in terms of evidence, if you want to call that evidence, in the last few days only, Amnesty International came out with this massive report. It's nearly 300 pages long, saying that it's genocide. Today, Human Rights Watch came with a report, 130 or 180 pages long, that says acts of genocide are being committed. Médecins Sans Frontières came with a report today as well, saying that acts of genocide are happening in Gaza. But I'm wondering, I mean, deep down, people in the US, in the State Department, must know that what's happening are violations of international law, international humanitarian law, war crimes, crimes against humanity. But I think the question, and maybe that's part of the case, is to highlight the fact that the US is not really complicit. The US is an active part of the genocide, right? I remember a few weeks ago, maybe it's a few months ago now, the Watson Institute of Brown University came back with a report saying that 70% of the genocide in Gaza was funded by the US. So it tells you a lot, right, about the US exact role in what's happening, correct?
Exactly. I mean, 100%. You're right. One of the things I've learned through this lawsuit process and Charles Blaha, really, typically these determinations of who's violating human rights standards are made at the level of specialist officers within the State Department. People who have the appropriate background, who've developed a career in understanding the law, who have an intimate understanding of the subject country that they're assessing, the context of that country. Specialists, they make the determination of whether the Leahy Law should be triggered or not. In the case of Israel, there seems to be this top-down approach where political appointees insert themselves into the process and seek to make that determination or really quash that determination or prevent it from being made. And again, this is what I've learned in speaking with these former State Department officials. The State Department itself issues reports indicating that Israel has violated human rights standards and laws, that Israel has perpetrated war crimes in Gaza. And one of the latest report, I believe, is on the website, the State Department website. It's what happens after that, where the Secretary Blinken says, well, the Israelis are capable of investigating themselves. We've brought our concerns to the Israelis, and they're doing a fine job in unearthing or adjudicating whatever it is that needs to be remedied, basically. And that's where, to me, it becomes clear that the political process is encumbering the observance of the law. That Antony Blinken's personal beliefs or preferences, whatever they may be, are acting to inhibit the State Department from complying with the law.
Yeah, and this is like this massive fake news, like bullshit, that Israel is capable, because it's a democracy, of investigating itself, is so blatantly false, and we know it because historically there are facts. I remember after Operation Cast Lead, Israel bombing Gaza for about 3 weeks. About 1,400 people died. I remember that PCHR, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, had about 400 cases brought to the Israeli Supreme Court of like war crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, etc. And I remember, and I probably get the numbers wrong because it was such a long time ago, but out of these 400 cases, only 6 were kind of taken to the Israeli Supreme Court. And out of the 6 cases, only 1 was held. And it was about a soldier stealing a credit card in Gaza. And I think the guy got like a 6 months suspension or something, which shows how much rubbish, this is. But I wanted to ask you specifically about yourself. Why did you decide to become a plaintiff for this case? I know you have family in Gaza, and yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me more about that.
I do. So I was born in Gaza, and my family moved when I was young, and we came to the United States, and I became an American citizen as a child. But most of my family's still there. Why did I join the lawsuit? I mean, that we have to use every available opportunity, every available point of leverage to bring this genocide to a close. I am not naive. I don't really think that Antony Blinken is going to stand up and say, "Wait a second, I've been breaking the law, and I'm going to adhere to the law now, and therefore the genocide is going to end." I think practically we're working to hopefully encourage compliance with the law in the future, so that this doesn't happen again. But also, I think the genocide is a done deal. With this law, we're notching one more link in the evidentiary chain. I don't think that we're ever going to see Antony Blinken at a war crimes tribunal. Of course, that's not going to happen. But I think, forcing these people to wear the brand of genocide, Blinken, Sullivan, Biden, Matt Miller, Ursula von der Leyen in Europe, Justin Trudeau and Keir Starmer, these people are the villains, Olaf Scholz as well. They're the people who have, in some cases, been complicit with the genocide, and others actively enabled and supported the genocide. And I think every chance we get to further attach them to this genocide ought to be pursued. I think it'll pursue them for the rest of their lives. I don't know if Antony Blinken is going to get a wonderful teaching position at Columbia or Harvard after this genocide's over. I think he probably will, but this is going to follow him for the rest of his life.
Yeah. We live in a moment, I hope anyway, of extreme clarity. I think what's happened since October 7th, as for people that still had doubts about what Israel was about, what the U.S. relationship with Israel was about, it's been, all the veils have kind of fallen, and I totally understand that it's important to, there's need to be, we need to have accountability, and they need to be accountable for what they've done. I was wondering that, so your family in Gaza, I've heard that they were actually internally displaced, like so many people in Gaza, constantly, right? Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Yeah, I wonder if there's anybody in Gaza who hasn't been internally displaced at this point. Gaza is unlivable. Everybody there is on life support. So at the start of the genocide in October of last year, my uncle, who was in Medinat Gaza City, he and his family were forced south. He was married before. His last wife, she was murdered. She was killed by the Israelis in 2014. And so that, you're talking about a family which is already deeply traumatized. And now he's remarried. He has young kids from his new relationship. And he's living in a tent with his older children and a 5-year-old daughter. Um, I have 2 more aunts on that side of the family who are also were in Khan Yunis and Rafah, and now in Rafah in a camp in tents. And then on my father's side of the family, they've been displaced as well. And my cousin's 19-year-old son was killed by a sniper in Rafah just a few weeks ago. And to kind of highlight how this is not something that started a year ago. So Yasser, my cousin, his brother Iyad, my cousin, was killed by the Israelis in 2009, also by a sniper, also there near Kerem Shalom, Karm Abu Salim. Um, it's just endless and it's relentless, you know.
Yeah, and something that we often talk about. I was wondering if I'll ask you if you kind of speak to them now and then, or something, if you're in contact with them. But the thing that's kind of been used a bit too much, we all talk about Palestinian sumud, resilience, how resilient the Palestinians are. But I think it's not khalas with resilience. You know what I mean? Like, in a way, saying it's resilient, it's like, look, they've gone through, like, cast lead in 2008, and then another one 2 years ago, and another one 2 years ago. But they shouldn't need to be resilient, because what's happening shouldn't happen. So it's, in a way, it's like not helping them to say, oh, the resilience of the Palestinians people, and in particular in Gaza, they've been annihilated while we talk, and this is just one of the worst massacre we've seen in the last decades. I was wondering, like, if you speak to them, because what's happening, obviously there are the numbers, but there's also the trauma. And there were recent studies saying that, was it like 95% of kids in Gaza were afraid to die, and out of those 95%, nearly 50% actually wish they would die. They had lost the will to live. So when you speak to them, if you do, what do they tell you about the world? Do they feel abandoned? Do they still have hope?
I think you kind of nailed it. The whole idea of sumud is people shouldn't need to be resilient. And the fact is, they're human beings. They're exhausted. They're disappointed. You imagine losing everything, and you can't rebuild from that. You can't. And Gaza can't be rebuilt. It's been so utterly destroyed, and people understand that. No, they're disheartened. They're embittered. They're angry. But you imagine waking up every day. You're a human being. You've got a day to get through. Either you have a job, or you take care of your kids, and you've got to go shopping, and you kind of just get through your day. Um, Now imagine being in a situation where there's not a day, where there's nothing to do, where the ordinary needs that every human being has kind of take up all of your energy and all of your focus, and then after that, there's nothing. Life has been destroyed, and one day resembles the next. And so there's no thrust, there's no reason to live. And I think there's this reality of listlessness, and psychologically, people are deeply traumatized, and it doesn't surprise me, and it makes me extremely sad to read, that 90-some children, 90% of children in Gaza are suicidal. Of course they are. And that's one of the great dimensions of this crime, this big obscenity. I'm writing an essay now on child amputees in Gaza. And I spoke with a doctor who had conducted surgeries, who was a Palestinian doctor who was working there. And he told me some horror stories. One about removing glass from the orbs of a girl who was looking out of a window when a bomb landed nearby, utterly destroyed her eyes. And he was just removing the glass from the bone in her ocular orbit. But he told me the thing that got him the most was how in the operating room and in the ICU, just crowds of people crushing around and sleeping on the floor, and the facilities are overwhelmed, and people are defecating wherever they can, and they're trying to meet the basic needs of life. And he told me what really hurt him, besides the trauma of the injuries and the surgeries and the deaths. Yoav Galant described the Palestinians as human animals, and then they proceeded to set out to make us human animals. The conditions that they've created in Gaza, the overcrowding, the basic, people are living like animals, and that's deliberate.
Hey, Ahmed, last question. Have you learned anything in the last 14 months that you kind of didn't know about the world, Israel, the Palestinians, solidarity?
There are. I live in the U.S. Now, and the transformation that's occurred here, I didn't expect to see in my lifetime in terms of popular support. I walk around, there are cafes everywhere, and people organize visuals spontaneously um, at a local park. That groundswell of support, the young people, it's been, and it's all kinds of people in society, but particularly young people, has been extraordinary to see. But the issue is that support in a democratic society, you have an idea of how policy change occurs. We're going to elect people who are going to reflect our interests and so on. There, that's going to occur way too slowly for the urgency of the situation. The relief that the Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere need, um, they've needed it since yesterday. They've needed it for 80 years now, and there's this, and so there's a lack of synchronization between the rate at which things are changing here and when that'll percolate up, and then the reality of ethnic cleansing and genocide, and when that project will be complete from the point of view of the Israelis who are perpetrating it. The thing that I've learned, the Zionist Israelis are worse than I realized. I was a one state guy for a long time, and um, when you see that 90% of that society, more than 90% of that society, supports the wholesale murder of children, and the slaughter of civilians, and destruction, the extermination of Palestinian life, everybody's Hamas, everybody's a terrorist, kill them all. It's just reported on some of the war crimes that's occurring with broad support in that society. I don't see the opposition. I don't see meaningful numbers of Israelis saying we are opposed to the genocide, not in my name. Israelis, and that's been disappointing. It's been. I didn't think that society was so radical or had been radicalized to such a degree, and I don't know how to de-radicalize that society.
Hey, thanks, Ahmed. It was yeah, really good talking to you, and shukran ktir for everyone, for bringing the case to the courts. And as you said, maybe it's not a winnable case, but at least it's about us also keep trying and keep exposing these people slash monsters for who they are, because history will remember them as such. I'm convinced by that. So yeah, thanks, Ahmed. Have a great day. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for everything that you do, and it's great to be back in touch. Thank you.